You killed your father in a duel, and afterwards your life got simpler. Cthonia was a mine with nothing left in it. The ore ran out centuries before you were born, and what remained was tunnels and the gangs who lived in them. Your father ran the strongest gang. You were his firstborn. First, you had to pass the rite of manhood. You failed it. What happened down there was never written down, only the result. You came up, you stood in front of your father, and you killed him. In front of the whole gang, by rules the gang had written itself. You are Ezekyle Abaddon. Not the despoiler yet. Right now you are a boy from a mineshaft who is good at exactly one thing. You will spend the next 10,000 years repeating one movement. You will kill your fathers. The one who made you, the one who chose you, the one they grow out of the corpse of the one who chose you. Then the sky over Cthonia broke open. The Emperor of Mankind was crossing the galaxy, putting the scattered worlds back together, and he did not come to Cthonia for ore. Horus was found here, a primarch, one of 20 sons flung across the stars, raised in the same tunnels you were a few decades earlier. By the time the fleet came for you, he already commanded a legion, and that legion had claimed your world as home. The logic was simple. If a primarch came out of these shafts, so would his warriors. They exiled you anyway. A boy who could kill the strongest chief on Cthonia was a problem no rule solved. You lived alone in the lower levels until they came for you. And they did not come for a prince in exile. They came for a large, dangerous animal worth collecting. You do not remember the selection. You remember the pain. A second heart first, because the original will not carry what comes after. Then 18 more implants, each with its own way of killing you if it fails to take. By the end, there is very little Chthonian boy left, but what remains weighs twice as much and is afraid of nothing. Then you saw Horus. A primarch stands in a room, and the room begins to orbit him. He looks at you and knows your name before you say it. The Emperor made 20 of these, and Horus was the first among them, the favorite. You looked at him and decided he was a god. Hold on to that. It lasts 200 years, and then it kills everything you know. You fought for humanity for 2 centuries. Mankind had shattered into fragments, and the Emperor went to collect them, and you went first. The Legion was the Luna Wolves until the Emperor renamed it after Horus, and you became a son of Horus. They invented a rank for you inside it, first captain of the Legion, which meant after the Primarch came you and nobody in between. They painted the first company black, the only black in a bone-white legion, named them the Justerin, and trained them on one instruction. Do what Abaddon does. Then Horus put you in the Mournival, the 4 captains a Primarch listens to when he needs to be argued with. You put Garvio Loken in it yourself, because he was blunt and stubborn and inconvenient. In a few years, you will leave him under the rubble of a city you burn on Horus's order. In a few years, you will carry that father to a sorcerer with your own hands. Davin was supposed to be nothing, a feral world you had already taken, where the governor had stopped answering and announced the emperor was no longer his concern. Davin's moon was not the moon you remembered. Where the settlements had been, there was swamp, and the garrison was still walking through it. They had not died. They kept moving, swollen and warm. Nurgle had reached that moon first. Horus went after the governor alone and killed him. But the man held a blade he should never have owned. The anathame, a Xenos weapon so foreign that Imperial science could not say how it worked. Horus took one cut. One. A Primarch who shrugged off bolt rounds and orbital falls took a single cut to the shoulder and started dying. They laid him on a slab and he rotted alive, and you stood there and watched your god die. That is when a man came to you who is cursed harder than you are. Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers. Not your legion, not your business, but he was standing there, and he had a solution. There is a serpent lodge on Davin. There are people there who heal what cannot be healed. You knew what that meant. The Emperor had built the Imperium on the Imperial truth. No gods, no magic, no spirits. Carrying a primarch into a cult shrine meant spitting on everything you had fought for. You agreed. Not because you were weak, you counted the options and there were two. Horus dies on the slab in a few hours, or Horus possibly does not. You picked your primarch up in both arms and carried him into the shrine. People argue for a long time about who is guilty. They argue because the simple version is uncomfortable. The Horus heresy started because Abaddon did not want his father to die. He came out alive. That is the worst part. It worked. The wound closed, the primarch stood up, and the legion roared. You were standing closest, and you were first to notice something was wrong. Same voice, same walk, same ability to fill a room. Except now something stood behind his eyes, and it did not go away when he blinked. Horus had been shown a future where the Emperor abandons humanity and ascends, and an Imperium that becomes a church worshipping a corpse. About half of it was true, which makes it far more dangerous than a clean lie. And you followed, because you would have followed him anywhere, and because you carried him in there yourself, and because no man admits a mistake that size. Isstvan III came next. On paper, putting down a rebellion. In fact, gathering every warrior who would not turn against the Emperor into one place to kill them in an afternoon. You knew the plan. You were in the Mournival. They put 4 legions on the ground and the fleet dropped virus bombs on them. A living planet turned to slurry in minutes. They sent you in to finish the survivors, and you found Loken in the rubble. The man you vouched for. He was pinned and he asked whether you understood what you were doing. You did not kill him. You walked away, because walking away was easier than answering the question. Then 7 years of civil war. And then Terra. You stormed walls a kilometer high. You watched titans fall into the mud and keep firing from the ground until they burned out. You walked over dead Astartes stacked several deep and stopped checking the colors, because nobody had colors anymore. Then Horus dropped the void shields of his own flagship, inviting the Emperor aboard. He wanted to finish it himself. Father against son, no armies. And you ran. You were on the surface and the fight was in orbit, and you cut upward through everything between, through Imperial Fist's terminators, through decks, to the bridge where it was being decided. You were late. You came onto the bridge and it was quiet. Sanguinius was dead, opened up by the Talon on Horus's left gauntlet. Horus was dead beside him, killed by a psychic strike so total that nothing of him remained in the warp. The body died. Everything else was erased. You stood on decking slick with the blood of 2 demigods and understood it was finished. Not lost. Finished. You picked the body up in both arms, the way you had on Davin. But first you tore the Talon off his gauntlet, the one that had killed Sanguinius minutes earlier, the one that had touched the Emperor. You mounted it on your own right arm, and you have worn it ever since. Not as a relic, as a tool. You already knew what you needed it for, though you would not need it for 10,000 years. The Legion ran into the Eye of Terror, a tear in reality thousands of light years wide. The Imperium did not follow. You were expected to rot in there on your own, and for centuries, nobody saw you. The Legion built a fortress on a world of compacted shipwrecks, and the fortress was a tomb. In its center, in stasis, lay Horus, and the Legion knelt around him and prayed. Your brothers, who had spent 2 centuries burning temples for the Imperial truth, on their knees in front of a corpse. You looked at that and left. You did not run out of anger or strength. You ran out of reason. You took the Vengeful Spirit into the deep eye alone. They call it the Dark Pilgrimage. You walked every world in there and worked out the thing that mattered. The warp is a system. Systems have laws. Laws can be used. While you were gone, someone stole your father. The Emperor's children carried the body to Fabius Bile, who had spent millennia taking the Emperor's genetic legacy apart and putting it back together to his own taste. He started cloning. Whoever returns Horus to the legions owns the legions. Meanwhile, you were collecting people, not an army. 8 men who had all stopped thinking of themselves as their primarch's sons. You asked them who built the Imperium, who crossed the galaxy and cleared the Xenos out of it, who left a road of corpses from one edge of the stars to the other. We did, you said. It is our Imperium, and we are rotting in hell killing each other over slaves. You offered them a war to take it back, the Long War, and you offered them one thing none of them had owned in 10,000 years, men who chose each other instead of a legion assigned from above. 8 agreed that night. First, you had to kill your father a second time. Your sorcerer spent months dragging a dead ship across the eye behind you, 2 kilometers of empty iron, and when the Emperor's children fleet engaged, you dropped it on their capital. Then you boarded Bile's ship and found rows of tanks in the Apothecarian. Primarch clones, all 20, children with faces you recognized because you had seen the originals up close. Then footsteps came from the next compartment. He walked out in his own armor, stripped off his own corpse, white wolf fur in tatters, holding the maul the Emperor gave him on the day he named him Warmaster. Horus Lupercal, grown out of dead meat, whole and walking. He swung without checking who was in front of him, and the men who fired on him died first. You said one word. You said enough. You did not shout. He turned, because he knew that voice. He swung at you, and you caught it in the Talon of Horus, and the 2 of you stood face to face, and only the weapons said which of you was which. He said, "That is my Talon." You closed your fist, and the maul the Emperor had given him came apart on the deck. No speeches, no accusations. A father and a son standing among the dead. Then he recognized you, with whatever part of the original was still in there. He said, "Ezekyle, my son, my son." You put all 5 talons through his chest until they came out of his back. You held him while the light went out, and you leaned in and said 5 words. You said, "I am not your son." You came back and found the Legion eating itself, and you hunted the captains one at a time through the ruins of your own fortress until there was one commander. Then you gave an order. Repaint. The green went under black. Black is mourning. You were not burying Horus. You were burying the men you used to be, the ones who had spent 2 centuries being somebody's sons. From that day, you are the Black Legion. Between you and the throne stood 10,000 years and 1,000,000 worlds. So, 10,000 years. The first Black Crusade came out of the Eye centuries after Terra, reached Cadia, and stopped. The Imperium filed it as a failure. While their admirals celebrated, you were under the Tower of Silence on Urallan carrying out a sword. Dracnean, holding the thing that calls itself the first murder ever committed by a human being. It talks. It bargains. It has never once won the conversation. 12 more followed across 7,000 years. You put a curse into a planet's core that is still there. You sacrificed a whole city in one ritual and opened the sky for a demon prince older than the Imperium. On Arcreach, you offered Drakarth the Sightless an alliance, fought beside him for months, then shook his hand while putting the talon through his stomach, and he lived long enough to watch his own warriors kneel to you. On Mackin, you took the gene seed of the Blood Angels, and in the Gothic War, you took 2 Blackstone fortresses, moon-sized stations made of a material that no longer exists, and fired 3 of them into a star until the whole system went with it. 12 crusades, 12 times out of the Eye, 12 times thrown back. The Imperium started laughing at you. You became the worked example in staff colleges of an enemy who cannot finish. 12 failures in a row do not happen to a man who is trying to win. They happen to a man doing something else. You were never trying to take Cadia. Look at what you carried out of each one. A sword from under a tower, a curse in a planet's core, a city fed whole to the warp. 2 Blackstone fortresses. That is not loot. That is a work order. Along the line between the Eye of Terror and Terra stand monoliths of blackstone. Not weapons, they hold the warp back the way a dam holds water. You found them, and for 10,000 years, you knocked them out one at a time, covering every strike with a campaign that looked like a raid. You were never carving a road to Terra. You were walking the Eye of Terror toward Terra. They call it the Crimson Path, and nobody knew about it except you. 12 defeats, 12 steps, 1 left. The 13th Black Crusade became the largest clash since the Heresy, and the point was Cadia. Cadia was a fortress world where children learned to strip a lasgun at 6, and its regiments trained their whole lives against one enemy: you. But they were not what you came to fight. Across the surface of Cadia stand pylons. Thousands of black columns of the same material as the black stone fortresses, put there by the Necrons before humanity learned to make fire. They repel the warp. They are why the Eye stayed inside its borders for 10,000 years. Cadia was a fortress built to guard what stands on its surface, and you came for the pylons. Then it went wrong. Belisarius Cawl was on Cadia, and beside him, Trazyn the Infinite, a Necron lord who knew everything about the pylons because his own species had planted them. Together, they switched the network on, and the Eye of Terror began to contract. Not hold, contract. For the first time in 10,000 years, your sorcerers went silent. Your demons dissolved. Teleportations stopped working. The warp you drew everything from stopped reaching the surface. You stood on Cadia and lost. Properly, for the first time in your life. One option was left. In orbit hung a black stone fortress whose weapon was meant to scour Cadia in a single shot. It never fired. The phalanx came out of the warp, the star fortress of the Imperial fists, moon-sized and older than the Imperium, and struck first. Cadia held, genuinely held. Men on the surface, cut off, with a Necron and Eldar helping, beat the Warmaster of Chaos. You admitted it, and you understood that another day of this, and the Eye would shrink far enough that the entire Crimson Path would have to start over, with nobody left to start it with. You looked at the planet you had failed to take by force for 10,000 years, and understood you would not take it now either. So you dropped the wreck of your own fortress onto it, several billion tons of stone falling. Not a weapon, not a ritual, not demons. The impact killed almost everyone still alive on the surface, and it broke the pylon network. Cadia came apart within hours underneath the people still standing on it. And days later, the sky split across the entire galaxy. With the pylons broken, there was nothing holding the Eye at all. The tear ran from the Eye of Terror to the far edge of the galaxy, through hundreds of sectors, through the roots that held the Imperium together. They call it the Great Rift. The Astronomicon stopped reaching the far side, and half of humanity went dark, without fleets, alone with whatever came out of the tear. You stood on your bridge and watched it open. 10,000 years, 13 crusades, 12 defeats that Imperial tacticians laughed at. All of it was for one night. One thing left: to name yourself. For 10,000 years they had offered you the title of Warmaster, and you refused every time. Warmaster is the post the Emperor gave Horus when he named him first among his sons. Horus wore it and lost everything there is to lose in 7 years, because he wanted a throne and because he let gods use him. You were not taking a loser's name. After Cadia you took it, but not the one they were offering. You declared yourself Warmaster of the Imperium Nihilus. A champion belongs to the gods. A Warmaster holds ground. Half of everything humanity owns, cut off from Terra and hanging in the dark. More than Horus ever held. They offered you ascension too, Daemon Prince. Immortality and a permanent seat in the great game. Half your subordinates would have taken it without thinking, and many did. You refused every time. A Daemon Prince belongs to the god who raised him, permanently, with no exit. You had watched what happens to a man who lets gods use him. You carried his body in your arms twice. So you are still mortal, an ordinary space marine from a mineshaft, with no genetic gift and no divine blood, who simply outlasted everyone. Terra is still standing. Guilliman came back after 10,000 years in stasis, and the Imperium got the one thing it lacked, a commander. And you sat on your bridge over the charts and did not know where to strike. For 10,000 years, every step had been accounted for. The plan finished. It worked. And now you had half a galaxy and no next move. That is when Vashtorr came. Straight onto your bridge, without invitation. Vashtorr the Archiphane, Lord of the Soul Forge. He spoke honestly, which for his kind is rare. He said he wanted to become the fifth Chaos God, to stand beside the four and play their game as an equal. And he offered you a deal. You took it. You built the Arcs of Omen together and sent them hunting fragments of a key that opens a lock. And behind the lock lies a weapon left by a species that lived here before all of you. Vashtorr assembled the key and went looking for the lock. Nobody knows yet what comes next. Stop the frame here and look at him again. A boy from a mineshaft who killed his father so his father would stop giving him orders. A first captain who carried his primarch to a sorcerer because he could not let him die. A warrior who put 5 talons through that primarch's clone and told him he was nobody's son. A man who spent 10,000 years refusing to serve a god because he had watched what gods do to the people who serve them. And there he stands on his bridge making a deal with a thing that has just told him, out loud, that it intends to become a god. You did not notice. You never notice. You kill a father and you find a new one. You bury the new one and you go looking for a third. Every time it feels like this time you are free, and every time you are only choosing who to obey next. Cthonia, Davin, Terra, Cadia, one movement stretched across 10,000 years. You opened the rift. You split the galaxy. You took a title you had refused for 100 centuries. You just could not be alone. And that was your whole life.